They wanted me to give up my grandpa's will. I said no, and it changed my life forever. I never planned on becoming the owner of a rundown drive-in theater at 20 years old. That definitely wasn't on my radar between trying to finish community college and working double shifts at Marge's Diner. But life has this way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them, especially in a small town like Riverdale, Ohio, where everyone knows your business before you do. Standing in that stuffy lawyer's office, surrounded by wood paneling that hadn't been updated since the Reagan administration, I felt completely out of place. My work jeans and faded Buckeyes t-shirt were a stark contrast to my dad's crisp business suit and my brother Ryan's preppy polo ensemble. The lawyer, Mr. Hoffman, adjusted his tortoiseshell glasses and continued reading Pop's will like he was reciting a grocery list. To my son, Thomas Miller, I leave my residence at 423 Maple Street and its contents. Dad nodded, his face expressionless. No surprise there. The house was worth at least $300,000 in our market. To my grandson, Ryan Miller, I leave my 1967 Ford Mustang Fastback and a sum of $50,000 to support his educational pursuits. Ryan smirked. Of course Golden Boy got the classic car. He'd been eyeing that Mustang since he was 12, talking about how he'd roll up to Harvard Business School in style. Then Mr. Hoffman cleared his throat. And to my grandson, Jacob Allen Miller, I leave the Starlight Drive-In theater property and all associated business assets. The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on that plush carpeting. Dad's face turned that specific shade of red that usually preceded a Category 5 hurricane. Ryan's jaw practically hit the floor. And me? I felt like someone had just punched me in the gut and hugged me at the same time. The Starlight Drive-In, Pop's pride and joy, or at least it used to be. Now it was just a skeleton of the 1960s drive-in glory days. A faded sign, a torn screen, and about 15 acres of prime real estate that developers have been salivating over for years. There's also this letter addressed to Jacob, Mr. Hoffman added, sliding a yellowed envelope across his mahogany desk. I took it with trembling fingers while Dad stared daggers at me. The envelope smelled like Pop's, Old Spice aftershave, and peppermint candies. Inside was a single page, the handwriting shaky but determined. Jake, you've got Nana's soul and my heart. Bring the Starlight back to life. Show them dreams don't die. Something tightened in my chest. Pops believed in me when nobody else did. Not my success-obsessed father. Not my mother, who was always too busy coordinating charity galas. Not my brother heading for the Ivy League. Just Pops, who taught me how to change oil and appreciate Hitchcock films. I could almost see him in his worn baseball cap, showing 5-year-old me how to thread film to projector while grease played on the massive outdoor screen. I'd chase fallen popcorn across the concrete, while Nana danced the blue suede shoes, her skirt twirling under the summer stars. Those were the best memories of my childhood. But that was before Nana died in '95. Something in Pops dimmed when she passed. He kept the Starlight running, but the joy was gone. Then in '98, a fire gutted the concession stand. Insurance covered it, but Pops never rebuilt. The Starlight closed its gates, and the heart of Riverdale went quiet. Still, Pops never stopped dreaming about reopening. Even as the weeds grew and the screen weathered, he'd sit in his office surrounded by old movie posters, sketching renovation plans that never materialized. This has to be some kind of joke. Dad finally broke the silence, his voice cutting through my memories. That property is worth millions, Tom. You're giving it to Jake? The kid can barely manage his community college classes. Mr. Hoffman adjusted his glasses again. Your father was very clear about his wishes, Thomas. Dad, Ryan jumped in. You can't seriously be considering keeping that dump? It's a gold mine for development. Sell it and split the money with me. We could both win. I clutched Pop's letter tighter. I'm not selling. The words came out before I even realized what I was saying. Dad and Ryan stared at me like I'd grown a second head. In 20 years, I'd never directly opposed them on anything important. Don't be ridiculous, Dad scoffed. That place is a money pit. You don't have the first clue about running a business. Ryan needs that money for Harvard. Of course. Ryan's Harvard dreams trumped everything in our family. The golden child needed his golden future secured. Meanwhile, I was just a disappointment working at a diner to pay for community college classes I was barely passing. The property taxes alone will bankrupt you, Dad continued, his real estate agent brain already calculating. Not to mention the renovation costs. Be smart for once, Jake. Sell it to Claiborne Development. They've been after that land for years. I looked down at Pop's handwriting again. He never saw me as the family failure. When everyone else was celebrating Ryan's perfect SAT scores, Pops was watching classic movies with me in his den, telling me stories about how he built the Starlight from nothing back in '62. The Starlight isn't just movies, Jake, he'd say, eyes twinkling with memories. It's where time stops and hearts beat together. It's where I met your Nana, where families make memories that last generations. Dad called it a foolish fantasy, clinging to the past when progress was knocking. But Pop saw something worth saving. I'm keeping it, I repeated, stronger this time. Pops wanted me to bring it back. Ryan rolled his eyes. You've always been the weak one, taking the path of most resistance instead of being practical. You have 24 hours to come to your senses. Dad stood up, straightening his tie. Think about your future, Jake. What are you going to do? Drop out of college to run a non-existent business. This isn't some coming-of-age movie. They left without saying goodbye. Mr. Hoffman gave me the deed and property keys with an apologetic smile. Your grandfather was a good man, stubborn as they come, but good. Said you were the only one who understood what the Starlight really meant. That night, I packed everything I cared about into my beat-up Honda Civic. $3,200 in savings from my diner job, some clothes, my laptop, a box of classic movie DVDs Pops had given me over the years. I didn't tell my parents I was leaving. They were probably already making calls to developers, assuming I caved like I always did. But something had shifted inside me. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was standing on solid ground, even though everything around me was crumbling. The drive to the Starlight took less than 15 minutes. Nothing's far in Riverdale, but it felt like crossing into another world. The massive lot was empty, except for weeds pushing through cracked asphalt. The projection booth sat dark and silent. The concession stand was just a charred skeleton. But the screen was still there, weathered and torn in places, but standing tall against the night sky. And the neon sign, though missing letters, still proclaimed SRLGHD Dar Vian to anyone who cared to look. I unlocked the projection booth, coughing as dust swirled in the beam of my flashlight. Cobwebs draped the old equipment like Halloween decorations. A calendar on the wall was frozen in September 1998, the month of the fire. Old film canisters lined the shelves, labeled in Pop's neat handwriting. Casablanca, The Godfather, Jaws. The small office behind the booth was in better shape. Pops had used it as a kind of sanctuary long after the theater closed. There were sketches for renovation plans, catalogs of projection equipment, and a framed photo of Pops and Nana on opening night, 1962. I unrolled my sleeping bag on the office floor and read Pop's letter again by flashlight. My voice trembled as I whispered to the empty room. Pops believed in me. Maybe I'm not a hero, but I won't let his dream be bulldozed. Outside, an owl hooted, and somewhere in the distance, a train whistle cut through the night. I was completely alone for the first time in my life, with nothing but a massive responsibility and a head full of impossible dreams. I tripped over an old film reel, Casino Royale, and muttered, if I fail, at least I'll have material for a comedy about myself. Pops used to say, dreams are like stars, Jake. They seem far away, but if you reach out your hand, you just might catch one. Lying there in the dark, those words felt both comforting and terrifying. What if I reached and found nothing but empty air? Sleep came in fits and starts. Around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by the distinctive rumble of an engine. Headlights swept across the ceiling as a vehicle pulled into the old lot. My heart hammered against my ribs. Was it Dad? Ryan? Developers already coming to pressure me? I crept to the dirty window, peering through a crack in the blinds. The headlights belonged to an old pickup truck, and it was parked right in front of the Starlight's faded marquee. Someone was getting out, their silhouette visible only as a shadow moving in the moonlight. I grabbed my phone, ready to call 911, but hesitated. This didn't feel like trouble. Something about the way the figure moved, almost reverently, made me curious instead of afraid. Maybe Pops had sent me a sign. Or maybe I was about to star in my own personal horror movie. Either way, I was about to find out who visits an abandoned drive-in theater in the middle of the night. I jumped up from my makeshift bed and grabbed my flashlight, heart thumping against my ribs. Vandals were the last thing I needed right now. Riverdale might be a sleepy town, but teenagers with spray paint could still find their way to an abandoned property. I'd seen enough graffiti on the back of the screen to know this place had its share of midnight visitors. Creeping toward the door, I tried to channel my inner action hero, but the reality was I'd never been in a fight in my life. The closest I'd come was when Ryan put me in a headlock when we were kids because I changed the channel during the Super Bowl. Taking a deep breath, I flung open the door and aimed my flashlight beam toward the truck, trying to look more intimidating than I felt. That's when I saw her. A girl about my age examining the faded Starlight marquee in the dim glow of her pickup's headlights. She had dark curly hair pulled into a messy bun, worn jeans splattered with what looked like paint, and a vintage Rolling Stones t-shirt. She didn't look like a vandal or a developer spy. Just curious. She jumped when my flashlight beam hit her, raising a hand to shield her eyes. This is private property. I called out, trying to sound authoritative despite my voice cracking like I was 13 again. Sorry, she called back, not sounding particularly sorry. I'm not stealing anything, I swear. Just admiring this old sign. They don't make them like this anymore. I lowered my flashlight, relief washing over me. You scared me. Nobody comes here this late. Nobody except you, she pointed out, walking closer. Her eyes were bright even in the darkness. The kind of eyes that looked like they were always laughing at a joke only she knew. I'm Ellie. Are you the caretaker or something? Or something. I answered. I'm Jake. I actually own the place as of yesterday. Her eyebrows shot up. You own the Starlight? But you're like my age. 20. And yeah, my grandfather left it to me. I'm still processing it myself. Something shifted in her expression. Interest, maybe. She glanced back at the theater, then at me. Any chance I could get a tour? I've driven by this place 100 times, but I've never been inside. It was almost 3 a.m. Any reasonable person would have said no. But something about her enthusiasm felt genuine, and after the day I'd had with my family, genuine felt refreshing. Sure, I heard myself say, but there's not much to see yet. It's pretty run down. We spent the next hour wandering through the Starlight with our phone flashlights. I showed her projection booth, the charred remains of the concession stand, and the screen with its holes and tears. Instead of looking disappointed, Ellie seemed more excited with each crumbling corner we discovered. This place has serious potential, she kept saying, running her fingers along dusty surfaces like she was reading Braille. The bones are amazing, mid-century design elements everywhere. By dawn, we were sitting on the hood of her truck, watching the sunrise over screen. I'd learned she was 21, a design student at the community college, and worked part-time at her parents' hardware store. Her grandfather, Hank, had been a mechanic in town for 40 years. Wait, I interrupted when she mentioned his name. Hank Wilson? The guy who restored classic cars. Ellie nodded. That's my grandpa. He was Pop's best friend. They used to hang out here all the time. Pops mentioned him in all his stories about the early days of the Starlight. Her face lit up. No way. Grandpa Hank always talked about hanging out at the drive-in with his buddy Frank. That was your grandfather. I nodded, feeling that strange sense of connection that happens in small towns. Everyone's story eventually intertwines with yours if you pull the thread long enough. He said they'd drink beers after closing and tune up Mustangs right here in the parking lot. Ellie continued. They'd blast my girl on the speakers when no one was around. Grandpa Hank always said the Starlight was the heart of Riverdale. We ended up at Marge's Diner as the breakfast crowd was trickling in. I'd worked the closing shift there so many times, but it felt different sitting on the customer side of the counter. We ordered coffee, and I splurged on pancakes despite my dwindling funds. Something about finding this unexpected connection to Pops made me feel like celebrating. Over breakfast, I told Ellie about my inheritance and my half-formed dream of restoring the theater. I expected her to laugh, or at least give me that pitying look people reserve for hopeless dreamers. Instead, she nearly knocked over her coffee in excitement. "I'm in," she declared, pulling out her sketchbook from her backpack. "I've been looking for a real-world design project, and this is perfect. My parents' store can help with supplies. I know how to get discounted paint, and my cousin's an electrician." Whoa! I laughed, both terrified and thrilled by her enthusiasm. "I've got about $3,200 to my name. That's not exactly a renovation budget. It's a start," she insisted, already sketching what looked like a neon sign. "We'll figure out. Crowdfunding, volunteers, whatever it takes. This place deserves a second act." I wanted to believe her. Looking at the confident way her pencil moved across the page, I almost could. The reality check came hard and fast over the next week. My $3,200 evaporated like morning dew in July. Basic cleaning supplies, permits from the city, and a used digital projector from eBay that smelled suspiciously like it had been stored in a garage with 17 cats. Ate through my savings faster than I could say financial planning. The electrical system was a nightmare. Ancient wiring that probably violated every code in the book. The screen had more holes than a golf course. And every time I went into town for supplies, I'd catch locals giving me those sideways glances that said they were taking bets on how long before I failed. Even Marge, who'd employed me since I was 16, raised an eyebrow when I told her my plans during my shift. An outdoor movie theater? Honey, people have 75-inch TVs and Netflix now. Why would they sit in their cars to watch movies? I didn't have a good answer. Maybe she was right. Maybe Dad and Ryan were right too. Who was I kidding? I couldn't even keep my community college GPA above AC average. What made me think I could resurrect a business that had been dead for decades? I was knee-deep in self-doubt, sitting on the roof of a projection booth and staring at the sunset, when Ellie's truck pulled in. She hopped out, carrying a large cardboard tube and a takeout bag that smelled like heaven. "Burgers," she announced, climbing up to join me, "and blueprints." She unrolled her designs while I devoured the food I hadn't realized I was starving for. Her sketches transformed the Starlight from the rundown skeleton it was to the retro paradise it could be. A gleaming neon sign, a 1950s-style concession stand serving gourmet popcorn and craft sodas, even a small stage for live music before shows. "This is amazing," I admitted, "but also impossible. The electrical work alone would cost thousands." "One step at a time," she said, pointing to her first phase plans. "We clean it up, fix the screen with materials from my parents' store, get some paint on the booth, and open with a limited schedule. Just enough to show it's viable." When she said it, it almost sounded possible. "My dad thinks I'm an idiot for not selling," I confessed. "Says I'm throwing away my future." Ellie studied me for a moment. "What does your future look like if you do sell?" "Another bland strip mall where the Starlight used to be. Some cash in your pocket that'll eventually get spent. And what? Back to the diner? Classes you're not passionate about." She gestured toward the screen, silhouetted against the purple dusk. "Or you could build something that means something. Not just to you, but to everyone who remembers what this place was, and everyone who never got to experience it." I remembered what Pops used to say. Every star begins with a spark, Jake. Maybe Ellie was that spark. The next day, we attacked the Starlight sign with cleaning supplies. The S and T were completely missing and rust had eaten away at the metal, but underneath years of grime, the original colors were still vibrant in places. I was up on a ladder, scrubbing at decades of dirt, when my soapy sponge slipped from my hands and drenched Ellie standing below. Water and suds cascaded down her face and shirt as she stood there in shock for a second before bursting into laughter. "You're either a genius or the worst restorer in Ohio," she sputtered through giggles. "Either way, I'm definitely getting hazard pay for this." I grinned down at her. Maybe I'll direct Titanic 2 when this project inevitably sinks. We worked long days, fueled by cheap pizza and cheaper coffee. Ellie recruited a couple of her art school friends to help with painting. I continued working night shifts at the diner, coming back to the Starlight to collapse for a few hours before starting again. My phone buzzed with texts from my father and Ryan daily, variations on "come to your senses yet?" that I left unanswered. One night, we were clearing out the storage loft above the projection booth. Decades of movie memorabilia, old equipment, and dust-covered furniture had been crammed into the space. Ellie found an old radio that miraculously still worked and tuned it to a classic station. Ain't No Mountain High Enough played as we sorted through piles of movie posters from the 60s and 70s. Ellie sang along, her voice surprisingly good, and I found myself laughing more than I had in years. When a bat suddenly swooped through the room, leading to some extremely undignified screaming on my part, we both tumbled backward into a pile of old posters. My hand landed on hers, and for a moment, we just stayed there, catching our breath, fingers almost intertwined. I wanted to ask her out for coffee, a real coffee, not the lukewarm stuff we drank from thermoses while working. But the $12 in my wallet reminded me that dreams were about all I could afford right now. Pops used to say, "Don't be afraid to get your hands dirty, Jake. The best stories are written where hands are at work." I told her instead, helping her up, "I think you like what we're doing here." "I think so, too," she said softly, her hand lingering in mine for just a second longer than necessary. The next morning reality delivered its knockout punch. A black SUV pulled into the lot while I was patching holes in the screen. A man in an expensive-looking suit climbed out, carrying a clipboard and wearing the kind of smile that makes you instinctively check if your wallet is still in your pocket. "Jacob Miller?" he called out, picking his way across the uneven ground in shoes that probably cost more than my car. "That's me," I answered, climbing down from the scaffolding Ellie had borrowed from her parents' store. "Walter Jenkins, county inspector." He handed me a business card that looked like it belonged in American Psycho. "I'm here about your property." For the next 20 minutes, he walked around making notes and asking questions about my operational timeline and renovation schedule. With each mark on his clipboard, my stomach sank further. "Here's the situation," he finally said. "This property has been designated as abandoned for years. There's a county ordinance requiring abandoned commercial properties to either be restored to functional use or demolished within a reasonable time frame. But I just inherited it. I protested. I'm working on restoring it right now." He nodded like he'd heard this before. "The thing is, your grandfather was given several extensions due to his history with the community. But the county board has been under pressure from developers to enforce the ordinance. Claiborne Development has submitted proposals for this area 3 times in the last 5 years. My father's favorite developer. What a coincidence. So what are you saying?" I asked, though I already knew. "You have 60 days to get this place operational," meaning regular business hours, proper safety compliance, and actual paying customers, "or the county will revoke your commercial property license and condemn the structure." "That's impossible," I said, panic rising in my throat. Full renovation would take months, and I don't have that kind of money. Jenkins shrugged. "Not my department. I'm just a messenger. 60 days, Mr. Miller. And between you and me, the developers are already circling. They've been eyeing this land for years." He handed me a formal notice and drove away, leaving me standing there with a piece of paper that might as well have been my grandfather's dreams death certificate. I sank down onto the concrete, trying to process what had just happened. The county could force me to sell or demolish the Starlight. How was that even legal? But deep down I knew. Small-town politics, developers with deep pockets, and my father pulling strings behind the scenes. It all added up. "What happened?" Ellie asked, finding me still sitting there an hour later. I handed her the notice, watching her face as she read it. 60 days? That's impossible. I finished. It's over before it started. My dad wins again. But instead of agreeing, Ellie crumpled the notice and threw it aside. "No way. We're not giving up. Ellie, be realistic. We have 2 months to turn a rotting drive-in into a functioning business. We need permits, inspections, massive repairs. So we work faster, she interrupted. We get help. We make this happen. I looked up at her, this girl I barely knew who was fighting for my grandfather's dream almost harder than I was. Why do you care so much? This isn't your battle. She was quiet for a moment, looking out at the screen against the afternoon sky. My grandpa Hank told me once that places like the Starlight are more than just businesses. They're time machines. They hold the memories of everyone who ever laughed or cried or fell in love there. When they disappear, we lose a piece of who we are. She turned back to me, determined. Besides, I've never backed down from a challenge, and I'm not about to start now. Especially not when some suit with a clipboard tells me I can't do something. I thought about what Pops would say in this situation. Probably something about stars and dreams and never giving up. And for the first time, I really understood what he meant. 60 days, I said, standing up and dusting off my jeans. Let's show them what we can do. Standing in the middle of the Starlight's cracked parking lot, I could feel my stomach tying itself into advanced sailor's knots. 60 days? I'd barely survived 60 minutes with that ancient projector I bought. The thing made noises that reminded me of my grandma's washing machine right before it flooded the basement on Thanksgiving 2015. Not exactly the high-end cinema experience I was hoping to provide. 60 days to get this place running? I muttered, my voice sounding hollow even to myself. That's insane. We can't possibly. But Ellie was already whipping out her laptop, that determined glint in her eyes that I was starting to recognize as trouble, the good kind of trouble. Time to call in reinforcements, she announced, plopping down cross-legged on the hood of her truck and opening Instagram. Riverdale might be small, but it's got heart. People here remember the Starlight. I wanted to believe her, but doubt is a powerful thing when you spent most of your life being the family disappointment. People might remember it, but that doesn't mean they'll help save it. Ellie just smiled and kept typing. Want to bet? Within 24 hours, hashtag Save Starlight was spreading through Riverdale's social media like wildfire. Ellie's post, featuring old photos of the drive-in from its glory days alongside our sad current reality, had been shared over 100 times. By day 3, we had our first volunteers. It started with a handful of Ellie's friends from the community college, showing up with extra paintbrushes and portable speakers. Then came the curious locals, drawn by nostalgia or just plain boredom. It's not like Riverdale had a hopping social scene. But what really blew me away were the older folks who started appearing, carrying folding chairs and thermoses of coffee, ready to share stories, and surprisingly willing to get their hands dirty. Mr. Crow, who had to be pushing 80, shuffled up one morning clutching a cardboard tube. Heard you kids were fixing up Frank's place, he said, his voice gravelly from decades of cigarettes. He carefully unrolled a pristine 1942 Casablanca poster, its colors still vibrant despite its age. Been keeping this longer than I kept my wife. Frank would want it back where it belongs. Mrs. Jenkins from the library brought her old record player and a stack of vinyl, insisting that proper ambience was essential for our work. Soon, Fly Me to the Moon was floating across the lot as volunteers scrubbed years of grime off the concession stand walls. Even more surprising were the teenagers. In a town with nothing to do, the prospect of being part of something Instagram-worthy was apparently irresistible. They took selfies while painting, uploaded TikTok videos of the renovation progress, and somehow made our desperate scramble look cool. See? Ellie nudged me as we watched a retired shop teacher patiently showing a group of high schoolers how to repair the wooden speaker poles. What did I tell you? People care. For 2 weeks straight, the Starlight was alive with activity from sunrise to well past sunset. We patched the screen with heavy-duty material Ellie's parents sold at a steep discount. We cleaned out years of debris and animal nests from the concession stand. We repaired what we could of the old speaker system, though most people would be using their car radios with the FM transmitter we ordered. But for every problem we solved, 3 more popped up. The screen repair was coming along until I fell off the ladder, narrowly missing breaking my neck, but successfully ripping down an entire section we just fixed. The projector made concerning grinding noises whenever we tested it. And one memorable afternoon, Ellie ended up wearing more paint than we got on the walls when a rusted pipe above her suddenly gave way. She stood there, dripping in baby blue paint, looking like some kind of avant-garde art installation. Maybe we should pivot, I suggested, fighting back laughter. Forget movies. We could open an abstract art gallery featuring you as the main exhibit. Ellie flicked paint at me, adding blue speckles to my already dirt-streaked t-shirt. Very funny, Spielberg. Keep it up, and I'll make sure you're my canvas for the sequel. Despite the setbacks and my perpetual state of exhaustion from working late shifts at Marge's, and then coming back to the Starlight until 2 a.m., we were making progress. Real, visible progress. The kind that made me start to believe this crazy plan might actually work. Then my family showed up. I was on my knees behind the concession counter, trying to make sense of plumbing that looked like it had been installed during the Eisenhower administration, when I heard a familiar engine, Dad's Range Rover, the unofficial uniform of successful realtors everywhere, pulled into the lot, kicking up dust as it stopped mere inches from where a group of volunteers were painting the refreshment menu. Dad stepped out in his pressed khakis and polo shirt that probably cost more than all the clothes I own combined. Ryan emerged from the passenger side, designer sunglasses perched on his head like he was at a country club instead of a construction zone. I hadn't seen or spoken to either of them since the day at the lawyer's office. 3 weeks of blissful family silence, broken in the worst possible way. What the hell is all this? Dad demanded as I approached, gesturing at the volunteers and the half-finished renovations. You're actually going through with this nonsense. I wiped my hands on my jeans, suddenly aware how dirty and exhausted I must look. It's not nonsense. We're reopening in a few weeks. Ryan snorted. Yeah, I'm sure this dump will be a huge hit. People will definitely choose this over their home theaters. Dad wasn't interested in the banter. His face had that hard set to it that appeared whenever business was on the line. Do you have any idea what you're doing to our family? The Claiborne deal could fall through because of your stubbornness. What Claiborne deal? I asked, though I was starting to connect some very suspicious dots. They want to develop this entire area. Dad said, luxury condos, high-end retail, the works. The kind of project that would put Riverdale on the map. The kind of deal that would secure my position at the firm. But they need contiguous properties, including this one. Of course, this wasn't just about my inheritance. This was about Dad's business ambitions, like always. Let me guess, I said, anger bubbling up. You promised him you could deliver the Starlight before Pops even died. That's why you're so worked up about me keeping it. Dad's silence was all the confirmation I needed. Dad's merger with Northeast Properties depends on landing the Claiborne account. Ryan added, my Harvard tuition isn't getting any cheaper either. Stop being selfish. I'm being selfish? The irony was almost too much. You got $50,000 and a classic car. Dad got the house. I got this place because Pops knew I was the only one who cared about it, not because of what it's worth. Dad stepped closer, lowering his voice. You are throwing away your future and damaging this family over a ruin. You're a nobody, Jake. A community college dropout working at a diner. This theater is as much a failure as you are. His words hit like physical blows. Not because they were shocking, but because they confirmed what I'd always suspected he thought of me. In his eyes, I was nothing. The second son who would never measure up. You have until the end of the month, Dad continued. Sell to Claiborne, or consider yourself cut off. No more health insurance. No more phone plan. No more fallback option if this predictably fails. They left without waiting for my response, Ryan's parting glance almost pitying as they drove away, leaving me standing in a cloud of dust. Ellie found me sitting in the projection booth half an hour later, staring at the wall. I saw them leave, she said softly. That bad? Worse, I answered. Apparently I'm ruining the family by not selling to their developer friends. Oh, and I'm a worthless failure who should just accept that I'll never amount to anything. Ellie sat down beside me. If you were a failure, you have already given up. Instead, you got 20 people out there sweating in the July heat because they believe in what you're doing. I wanted to believe her, but the truth was, Dad's visit had brought all my doubts rushing back. We'd made progress, sure, but we were still so far from ready. The electrical system needed a complete overhaul, an estimated $5,000 we didn't have. The county inspector would be returning in just over a month, and if we weren't operational, all of this would be for nothing. We're not going to make it, I said quietly. Even with all the help, we're running out of money and time. Ellie was quiet for a moment, then stood up. Wait here. She disappeared for almost an hour. I kept working because what else could I do? When she returned, she was practically bouncing with excitement. I talked to my parents, she announced. They're loaning us $8,000. Interest-free, enough to fix the electrical and get us over the finish line. I stared at her in disbelief. What? No way. Why would they do that? Because I can be very persuasive, she grinned. And because they love me and trust my judgment. They've seen how hard we're working, and they remember coming here when they were dating. Dad proposed to Mom during close encounters of the third kind. I couldn't wrap my head around it. $8,000? Just like that. Well, not exactly just like that. I may have promised to work extra shifts at the store for the next year, and I might have to postpone my transfer to state for a semester. She shrugged like these weren't major sacrifices. Small price to pay for saving a piece of history, right? Ellie, I can't let you do that. This is my problem, not yours. She gave me a look that immediately silenced my protests. First, it's not a problem. It's a project. Second, it stopped being just yours the minute I got involved. And third, my parents aren't exactly going broke here. Dad's been wanting to restore the wiring anyway to showcase their electrical supplies. It's practically free advertising for Wilson's Hardware. It made logical sense, but the emotional side of it was harder to accept. No one had ever believed in me enough to bet thousands of dollars on my success. The closest I'd come was Pops leaving me to theater, and even that felt more like a burden than a vote of confidence some days. I don't know what to say. I admitted, how about, thank you, Ellie. You're a genius, and I'll name my firstborn child after you, she suggested with a smirk. Thank you, I said sincerely. Not sure about the child naming part, but definitely thank you. With the Wilson family loan, things kicked into high gear. We hired a licensed electrician, Ellie's cousin Mike, who cut us a family deal to bring the wiring up to code. We ordered proper concession equipment, upgraded the FM transmitter, and even splurged on a better digital projector to replace the cat-scented monstrosity I'd bought. The volunteers kept coming, word spreading beyond Riverdale to neighboring towns. A construction crew from Millfield donated a Saturday to help rebuild the concession stand roof. A graphic design student created new branding that honored the vintage aesthetic while looking fresh. Local businesses started calling about sponsorship opportunities. For the first time, the 60-day deadline seemed possible, not probable, but at least possible. We scheduled a test screening for the weekend before the inspector's return, a proper dress rehearsal to work out any kinks before the official reopening. I was working harder than I ever had before. Shifts at Marge's, then straight to the Starlight until the early hours, catching maybe 4 hours of sleep before starting all over again. I was surviving on coffee and adrenaline, but for once in my life, the exhaustion felt purposeful. One evening, Ellie called me into the storage room behind the projection booth. She was covered in dust, but holding something carefully in her hands. "Look what I found while clearing out that cabinet," she said, holding out an old photograph in a simple wooden frame. It was Pops and Nana, much younger than I ever knew them, dancing in front of the Starlight screen. West Side Story was playing, the iconic fire escape scene visible behind them. They looked so happy, so in love, lost in their own world while surrounded by parked cars. "They built this place together," Ellie said softly, placing the photo in my hands. "They would tell you to keep fighting." I remembered something Pops told me once, during one of our movie nights after Nana died. Love isn't just about finding someone, Jake. It's about building a dream together, even when the whole world is laughing at you. Looking at Ellie dirt-streaked, exhausted, but still determined, I felt something shift inside me. She wasn't just helping with the Starlight. She was believing in it the way Pops and Nana had, the way I was learning to. Our moment was interrupted by a commotion outside. One of the teenage volunteers had managed to turn on the projector while we were testing the system. Instead of the calibration screen we expected, an ancient 1980s diaper commercial began playing on a massive outdoor screen, the jingle blasting through every working speaker. Great, I groaned as we hurried outside. We're officially showing kindergarten instead of Jaws. That'll really pack in the crowds. Ellie collapsed into giggles. Look on the bright side. We've finally found our niche market. Nostalgic parents of newborns. Eventually, we got the proper settings configured, and for the first time in decades, the Starlight screen glowed with a clear, vibrant image. The small crowd of volunteers cheered, and I felt a surge of pride so intense it was almost painful. Pops used to say, "The world can take everything from you, Jake, but not your spark. Hold on to it tight." Standing there watching his dream flicker back to life, I finally understood what he meant. The night before our test screening, I was making a final check of the grounds. We'd hung string lights around the perimeter, set up the ticket booth with its original 1960s signage, and even planted flowers along the entrance. The transformation was remarkable, not complete, but enough to hint at what the Starlight could be again. That's when I heard it, a rustling near the fence line. At first, I thought it was just the wind or maybe a raccoon, but then I caught a glimpse of movement, a figure darting away from property toward the road. I ran to where I'd seen the movement, flashlight beam bouncing ahead of me. When I reached the newly repainted sign, my heart sank. Someone had taken a crowbar or bat to it, leaving a jagged crack through the center. On the fence behind it, spray painted in dripping red letters, "Sell or else." Standing there in the darkness, staring at the thread on the wall, I felt something new, not fear or doubt, but anger. Whoever did this, whether it was Claiborne's people or some of my father hired or just local vandals, they weren't just attacking some old drive-in. They were attacking Pop's legacy, Ellie's hard work, the community that had rallied around us. Tomorrow was supposed to be our big test run, our chance to prove the Starlight could shine again. Now I had to decide, back down in the face of threats or push forward despite them. The answer, I realized, had been there all along in every story Pops ever told me about the stars. Morning came faster than I wanted after discovering the vandalism. I'd spent half the night sitting in my truck, watching the Starlight through bloodshot eyes, afraid the vandals might return to finish what they started. The sun rose over our damaged sign, making the red spray paint look even more garish in daylight. Ellie arrived with coffee and determination. First thing we do is get this cleaned up. Then we figure out how to protect the place. I called the police, because that's what law-abiding citizens are supposed to do when their property gets vandalized. Officer Daniel showed up an hour later, took a few photos, jotted some notes in his little pad, and basically shrugged it off. "Look, kid, I get that you're upset, but this isn't exactly the crime of the century. Vandalism and threatening graffiti? We get a dozen reports like this every weekend." I pointed at the smashed sign. This isn't just teenage pranks. Someone's trying to intimidate me into selling my property. Officer Daniels sighed, clearly wanting to get back to his late-night coffee and donuts. "You got any proof of who did it? Security footage? Witnesses?" We didn't, of course. All I had were suspicions and a damaged sign that would cost precious time and money to repair. "File a report with your insurance," he suggested, already heading back to his cruiser. "And maybe invest in some security cameras." Security cameras. Something we should have thought of weeks ago. I kicked myself for the oversight, but with our limited budget, they hadn't exactly been a priority. Until now. The next morning, Ellie and I drove to her parents' hardware store and maxed out my last credit card on a basic security system. Nothing fancy, just enough to cover the main entrance and the sign. Mr. Wilson threw in some motion sensor lights at cost, his way of saying he had our backs. "Don't let them scare you off," he told me as he helped load the equipment. "Your grandfather stood his ground against bigger threats than spray paint." "What do you mean?" I asked, suddenly realizing how little I actually knew about Pop's business struggles. "Back in '85, some developer wanted to buy out the whole strip," Mr. Wilson explained. When Frank refused, suddenly the Starlight had all kinds of code violations and tax audits. Funny how that works. But he weathered it, and so will you. By mid-afternoon, we had cameras mounted and operational. It wasn't Fort Knox, but at least we'd have evidence if our mystery vandal returned. Meanwhile, the damage needed fixing and fast. Word of the vandalism spread quickly through our volunteer network. I expected people to start dropping out. Who wants to work on a project that's being actively targeted? But the opposite happened. The attack seemed to galvanize the community. Ellie, ever the social media mastermind, turned the incident into a rallying cry. Her Instagram post showing the vandalism alongside a determined group of volunteers repairing the damage went viral by local standards. Hashtag Save Starlight started trending in our county, then across the state. Local news picked up the story. Historic drive-in fights for survival against developers. Suddenly, our little renovation project had become a David versus Goliath narrative, with the Starlight cast as the plucky underdog. And if there's one thing Americans love, it's an underdog. Donations started rolling in. The local credit union set up a community fund. The diner where I worked held a fundraising night. The high school drama club organized a car wash. It wasn't millions, but by the end of the week, we had almost $3,000 in additional funding. Even more valuable were the in-kind donations. An elderly couple brought a vintage neon transformer they'd saved from their old business. The sign shop in Millfield offered to repair our damaged marquee at no charge. Someone anonymously left a box of original Starlight drive-in souvenir cups from the 1960s on our doorstep. While fixing the sign, our volunteer crew broke into an impromptu sing-along of Sweet Caroline. As the chorus of B.A., B.A., B.A. echoed across the lot, I found myself grinning despite everything. This wasn't just my project anymore. It belonged to all of us. With 9 days left until the inspector's return, we scheduled our test screening. Back to the Future seemed like the perfect choice, a beloved classic with cross-generational appeal. Plus, there was something poetic about a movie that dealt with saving a future by revisiting the past. I barely slept the night before. Every worst-case scenario played to my mind on repeat. The projector failing, the sound system cutting out, nobody showing up, everyone showing up but hating it, the screen collapsing, aliens invading. Okay, that last one was probably just from watching too many sci-fi films with Pops. Ellie found me at dawn, pacing the projection booth and triple-checking everything. "You need to rest," she said firmly. "You look like you're auditioning for The Walking Dead." "Can't rest," I muttered, checking connections that I'd already checked 5 times. "Too much can go wrong." "And too much can go right," she countered, physically steering me toward the office couch. "Take a nap. I'll wake you in 3 hours." Managers, orders. I didn't remember falling asleep, but I must have, because the next thing I knew, Ellie was gently shaking me awake. "Jake, you need to see this." Still groggy, I followed her outside and stopped dead in my tracks. A line of cars stretched from the Starlight entrance all the way down Route 16. Families with coolers, couples on dates, seniors in classic cars, teenagers piled into Jeeps. They were all waiting. For us. For the Starlight. Holy! I couldn't even finish the sentence. "We posted the test screening details yesterday," Ellie explained, beaming. "I thought maybe 20 cars would show up. This is terrifying." I finished for her. Exciting, yes, but also absolutely terrifying. We scrambled to get ready, enlisting every volunteer available to direct traffic and handle the unexpected crowd. We'd planned for maybe 30 cars at most. We ended up with 63 vehicles packed into a lot that hadn't seen this much action since the Star Wars Special Edition release in 1997. As the sun set and families settled in with their popcorn and sodas from our hastily stocked concession stand, I stood at the back of the lot, watching the massive screen illuminate with the Universal Pictures logo. The sound of the movie played through car radios and our newly installed speakers. When the DeLorean first appeared on screen, people actually honked their horns in appreciation. Ellie found me midway through the film, sliding her hand into mine as we watched Marty McFly navigate the 1955 school dance. "We did it," she whispered. "Look around." I did. Families sharing popcorn. Kids playing on the grass area we designated for them. Couples snuggled in their cars. This was exactly what Pops had described to me. Not just people watching a movie, but people sharing an experience. Pops would be smiling right now. I whispered back, my voice tight with emotion. For that one perfect night, everything worked. The projector didn't fail. The sound was clear. The weather cooperated with a cloudless sky, full of stars. It felt like the universe was finally cutting us a break. I should have known better than to get comfortable. 2 days after our successful test screening, a black luxury sedan pulled into the Starlight lot. A man in an expensive suit emerged, flanked by 2 equally polished associates. I recognized him from the local business association photographs in the Chamber of Commerce. Gerald Clayton, CEO of Claiborne Development. Mr. Miller, he called out, as if we were old friends. Might I have a word? Clayton was everything my father aspired to be. Polished, confident, and reeking of old money. His handshake was firm, his smile practiced. I wanted to personally congratulate you on your little revival project, he said, gesturing around the lot. Quite an accomplishment for someone so young. The compliment might have seemed genuine, if not for a calculating look in his eyes. This was a man who didn't waste time on pleasantries, unless they served a purpose. Thank you, I replied cautiously. We're proud of what we've accomplished. As you should be. It's a charming novelty. However, his tone shifted subtly. I'm afraid there's a small problem with your continued operation. Of course there was. The other shoe was finally dropping. According to county records, this property is not zoned for commercial entertainment venues under the current code, Clayton explained, as one of his associates handed me a thick folder of documents. It was grandfathered and under the old regulations, but since it ceased operations for over 5 years, that exemption has expired. I flipped through the papers, my heart sinking. Legal jargon and municipal code swam before my eyes, but the gist was clear enough. They'd found a technicality. We're filing a formal complaint with the zoning board tomorrow, Clayton continued. Nothing personal, you understand. Just business. Just business. The universal justification for crushing someone's dreams. Of course, we're still very interested in purchasing the property, he added smoothly. Our offer stands at $1.2 million. More than generous, given the circumstances. With that bombshell delivered, Clayton handed me his business card and departed, leaving me standing in a cloud of dust and legal threats. I needed a lawyer, fast. The problem was most lawyers cost money, which was something I was critically short on despite our recent fundraising success. The electrical upgrades and security system had eaten through most of our budget, and what remained was earmarked for our grand opening. In desperation, I called the only attorney I knew personally, Mr. Hoffman, who had handled Pop's will. He listened patiently to my situation, then sighed heavily. I'm primarily an estate lawyer, Jake. This kind of zoning dispute is outside my usual wheelhouse. But, he paused, I know someone who might help. Franklin Pierce. He was a friend of your grandfather's. They played poker together for 30 years. 2 hours later, I was sitting in a cluttered office above the local barber shop, explaining my situation to a man who looked old enough to have personally witnessed the drafting of the Constitution. Franklin Pierce, no relation to the president, as he quickly informed me, was pushing 80 with wild white eyebrows and suspenders holding up pants that sat improbably high on his waist. His office was a chaotic archive of legal texts, fishing trophies, and framed photos spanning decades. Frank Miller's grandson, huh? He peered at me over reading glasses that had gone out of style sometime during the Nixon administration. Your grandpa saved my bacon in '78 when my boat sank at Peterson Lake. Pulled me out just before I became fish food. I hadn't heard that story before, but it sounded like Pop's. He was a good man, one of the best. Pierce continued. And that Nana of yours, she made the best damn apple pie in 3 counties. Pierce took the zoning documents from me, skimming them with surprising speed for someone his age. $800 retainer. He said abruptly, that's less than half my usual rate, and only because I owed your grandfather a debt I can never repay. It was my last $800, money I'd been saving for emergency repairs. but this definitely qualified as an emergency. We don't have much of a case, Pierce admitted after reviewing everything. Claiborne's legal team has done their homework, but we've got one thing they don't. What's that? I asked, desperate for any advantage. Time, he grinned, revealing a gold tooth. Zoning board moves slower than molasses in January. I can file motions and requests for additional review that'll drag this out at least through your 60-day window. Get your theater up and running, establish it as a going concern, and we'll have a much stronger position. It wasn't a solution, but it was a reprieve, and I'd take whatever I could get at this point. The next day, as I was installing the last of our refurbished speaker poles, a familiar Range Rover pulled into the lot. Dad, alone this time, no Ryan in tow. He looked tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that even his expensive clothes couldn't hide. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of sympathy. Then I remembered all the times he dismissed my dreams, all the cutting remarks about my capabilities. Clayton called me, he said without preamble, told me about the zoning issue. I bet he did, I replied, continuing with my work. Your timing is impeccable as always. Dad pulled out a checkbook and wrote with the gold pen he always carried, his success token, he called it. He tore out the check and held it toward me. $15,000, he said. Enough to walk away with something to show for all this effort. Take it and end this circus, Jake. You're not just hurting yourself now, you're hurting the whole family. I stared at the check. $15,000 was more money than I'd ever had at one time. It could pay for a year of college, buy a decent used car, maybe even be a down payment on a small house someday. This isn't about the money, I said finally. It never was. Everything is about money eventually, Dad insisted. That's the real world, not this fantasy you're living in. The real world, I repeated. You mean your world, where everything has a price tag and nothing has value unless it appreciates. That's not Pop's world. And I'm realizing it's not mine either. I didn't dramatically rip up the check like in some movie. I simply handed it back to him. I'm not selling. Something flashed across his face. Anger, disappointment. Perhaps a flicker of respect? It was gone too quickly to identify. Then you're not my son, he said quietly, pocketing the check. Don't come running home when this all falls apart. He left without another word, the dust from his tires settling on the speaker pole I'd just installed. Despite the legal threat hanging over us, we pushed ahead with preparations for our official opening night. The success of the test screening had generated real momentum, and advanced ticket sales, handled through Ellie's homemade website, were promising. For opening night, we chose Star Wars, A New Hope, a safe bet for broad appeal, plus the whole Rebel Alliance versus Evil Empire storyline felt oddly appropriate given our circumstances. The night arrived with perfect weather, warm but not humid, with a gentle breeze and a canopy of stars overhead. Cars began arriving 2 hours before showtime. Families spread blankets in front of their vehicles. The concession stand line stretched across the lot. Standing in the projection booth, watching everything unfold through the window, I felt a mixture of pride, terror, and disbelief. We'd actually done it. Against all odds, the Starlight was alive again. Ellie joined me as I was queuing up the film, her eyes bright with excitement. She'd changed from her usual paint-splattered work clothes into a vintage-inspired dress, her curly hair loose around her shoulders. We did it, she said, echoing my thoughts. No matter what happens next, we did this, Jake. As the opening crawl of Star Wars appeared on screen, and John Williams' iconic score blasted through the speakers, a cheer went up from the crowd. I felt something in my chest expand, like my heart was physically growing to accommodate all the emotions flooding through me. Ellie and I watched in the back of the lot, her head eventually finding its way to my shoulder as the Millennium Falcon escaped the Death Star. I fell in love with you, she whispered suddenly, her voice barely audible over the film. Because you fight for what you love, even when it's hard, even when everyone tells you to give up. I turned to look at her, this amazing person who had appeared in my life at exactly the right moment, who had believed in this crazy dream even more than I had sometimes. Under the same stars that had watched over the Starlight for decades, with the sound of the space battle providing the soundtrack, I kissed her, and in that moment, I understood what Pops had been trying to tell me all along. Maybe I wasn't a hero in the traditional sense, but with someone like Ellie beside me, I could be something more than I'd ever imagined for myself. Of course, the universe has a wicked sense of humor. Right in the middle of the film's climactic trench run, the projector glitched. The image froze, then skipped, then replayed the same 5 seconds in a loop. Luke Skywalker's determined face appeared over and over again as he repeated, "Almost there, almost there," while the crowd's confused murmurs grew louder. Panic mode engaged. I sprinted to projection booth, Ellie right behind me. After some frantic troubleshooting and creative use of technical terms I didn't actually understand, we got the system reset. I grabbed the microphone that connected to the outdoor speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, sorry for the technical difficulties. That wasn't a bug. It was a retro special effect. Welcome to the authentic drive-in experience." Surprisingly, people laughed and honked their horns good-naturedly. The film resumed, the Death Star was destroyed, and our opening night was, by any measure, a success. As people were leaving, I overheard snippets of conversation that made all the stress worthwhile. Just like when I was a kid, "We should come back next weekend. Can we have my birthday party here?" Pops once told me, "When the world knocks you down, become a falling star, but burn brightly." Standing there watching families drive away with smiles on their faces, I felt like I might finally understand what he meant. The next morning, amidst the cleanup and tallying of our surprisingly decent opening night profits, my phone rang. It was Franklin Pierce. "Jake," his voice sounded grave. "We've got a problem. A big one." My stomach clenched. "What now? More zoning issues?" "Worse," he said. "Claiborne's legal team just submitted documentation to the court. They claim your grandfather signed an agreement in 1997 promising to sell the Starlight land to Westfield Properties, which was later acquired by Claiborne." "That's impossible," I protested. "Pops would never." "They have a signed contract, Jake, with your grandfather's signature. If this document is legitimate, you don't own the Starlight. You never did." The phone nearly slipped from my suddenly numb fingers. "What does this mean?" "It means," Pierce sighed heavily, "if we can't prove this document is fraudulent, you lose everything." I sat in the projection booth back office, staring at the alleged agreement that Pierce had emailed me. The paper was dated September 1997, right after the fire that destroyed the concession stand. Pop's signature looked, right, that familiar scrawl I'd seen on birthday cards and permission slips my whole life. My stomach felt like it was filled with concrete. How could he do this? I whispered to the empty room. If this document was legitimate, Pops had promised to sell the Starlight to developers and then mysteriously change his mind, which meant my inheritance wasn't legally mine, which meant everything we'd done, all the work, all the hope, all the community support, was built on quicksand. Ellie found me like that, still staring at the printout, as if glaring at it might change the words. She took one look at my face and snatched the paper from my hands. "This isn't right," she declared after reading it. "Your grandfather wouldn't do this. Not the man who told you stories about preserving the Starlight. Not the man who left it to you specifically because he trusted you to save it." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But the signature. Pops was struggling after the fire. I said quietly, "Insurance barely covered the damages. Maybe he got desperate." Ellie shook her head fiercely. "No, there's more to this story. Grab your keys." Before I could ask where we were going, she was already heading for the door. That's how I found myself, on what should have been a day of preparation for our second weekend of operation, digging through dusty boxes in the county archives instead. The records department was in the basement of the municipal building, a fluorescent-lit dungeon of filing cabinets and forgotten paperwork. The clerk, an elderly woman who moved with the urgency of a sleepy tortoise, had given us access to the property records for the Starlight's address after Ellie spun a convincing story about a school research project. "What exactly are we looking for?" I asked, sneezing as I opened yet another box of musty documents. "I don't know," Ellie admitted. "Anything related to the Starlight or your grandfather from around 1997. There has to be something that explains this." For hours and countless paper cuts later, we found nothing that helped our case. If anything, things looked worse. There were zoning amendments filed around that time that would have made maintaining the drive-in more difficult. Maybe Pops really had been backed into a corner. Let's check Pop's old business files one more time, I suggested, pulling out the box of documents Pierce had collected from the Starlight's office for our case. We hadn't gone through them thoroughly, focusing instead on the county records. That's when Ellie gasped, holding up a yellowed envelope she found tucked inside a folder of insurance papers. "Look at this," she said, eyes wide. "It's addressed to your grandfather, but it's from your grandmother." That didn't make sense. Nana had died in 1995, 2 years before the alleged agreement. The envelope was carefully tucked away, with "For Frank, open when you need guidance" written on the front in Nana's elegant script. Unlike the love letter she used to send him with her signature lipstick kiss on the seal, this one looked like it had been opened and carefully resealed with transparent tape. With shaking hands, I carefully examined the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of Nana's floral stationery, her elegant handwriting immediately recognizable. "My dearest Frank, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you're considering selling our special place. The Starlight belongs to Riverdale, not to concrete and steel. Keep it safe, my love. Remember what we built there, not just a business, but a home for dreams. Someday, someone will love it the way we did. Wait for them. With all my heart, forever yours, Rose." The date at the top, June 1995, just weeks before she passed away. She'd known him so well that she anticipated his moment of weakness years before it happened. She knew. I whispered, a lump forming in my throat. She knew he might consider selling after she was gone. Ellie squeezed my hand, and he couldn't do it. That's why the agreement never went through. He read this letter and changed his mind. But the signature on that contract could be forged. Ellie finished my thought. Or maybe he signed it, but never finalized the deal because of this letter. Either way, we need to get this to Pierce immediately. Franklin Pierce didn't just look interested when we showed him Nana's letter. He looked downright gleeful, like a kid who'd found the golden ticket to Willy Wonka's factory. "This changes everything," he declared, already typing notes on his ancient computer. "We request a signature verification on the contract. We depose your grandfather's banker about his financial situation after the fire. We find witnesses who can testify about his intentions for the property." It was a long shot, but it was hope. Something I'd started to think was in short supply. The next 3 weeks were a blur of legal maneuvers and countermoves. Pierce filed motions. Claiborne's attorneys filed objections. We kept the Starlight running while preparing for a hearing that would determine its fate. Meanwhile, I reached out to everyone who might have known about Pop's business dealings in the late 90s. His banker confirmed that while Pops had considered selling after the fire, he'd ultimately secured a second mortgage on his house instead, a desperate move to save the drive-in, not offload it. The day of the hearing arrived with a kind of perfect autumn weather that seems designed specifically for outdoor movies. The county courthouse, a stone building that had witnessed over a century of Riverdale's dramas, was packed with Starlight supporters wearing homemade Save the Starlight t-shirts designed by Ellie. Gerald Clayton sat with his legal team, looking confident and bored, as if this were merely a minor inconvenience in his day. My father was notably absent. Judge Eleanor Simmons had a reputation for being tough but fair. She was also, as Pierce had discovered through his poker connections, a devoted film buff with a particular fondness for classics like Citizen Kane. "Your Honor," Claiborne's lead attorney began, "this is a simple case of contract enforcement. Mr. Miller signed an agreement to sell his property. His grandson's emotional attachment to the drive-in, while touching, is irrelevant to the legal obligation." Our turn came, and Pierce stood slowly, his ancient knees creaking audibly in the quiet courtroom. "Your Honor, we contend that this supposed agreement is either an outright forgery or an incomplete contract that was never executed. We have evidence that Frank Miller had no intention of selling the Starlight Drive-In." For the next hour, Pierce presented our case with the vigor of a man half his age. The handwriting expert we'd rushed to hire testified that while the signature looked authentic, the ink analysis showed inconsistencies with the document date. The banker confirmed Pop's desperate measures to keep the property. Former employees testified about his unwavering commitment to the drive-in. But our strongest evidence was Nana's letter, the voice from beyond that had guided Pops away from a decision he would have regretted. When the judge asked why the letter had never been found until now, Pierce didn't miss a beat. Because developers have been trying to get their hands on this land for decades. Your Honor, this letter was deliberately misfiled to hide it, just one of many attempts to pressure Frank Miller into selling a property that meant more to him than money. Judge Simmons' eyes narrowed at Clayton. Mr. Clayton, did your company acquire Westfield Properties assets in 2010? Clayton nodded. Yes, Your Honor. And did those assets include their records? Another nod. Then perhaps you can explain why the original of this alleged agreement has never been produced. Only a conveniently discovered copy that appears just when you're facing community opposition to your development plans? Clayton's smooth veneer cracked just enough to reveal the panic underneath. The judge wasn't buying their story. After a brief recess, Judge Simmons delivered her ruling. The alleged agreement was invalid due to insufficient evidence of execution and questionable authenticity. The Starlight remained mine. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Ellie threw her arms around me, and for the first time since this whole legal nightmare began, I could breathe again. Outside the courthouse, our supporters gathered for an impromptu celebration, complete with popcorn from the Starlight's concession stand. Pierce accepted my tearful thanks with a gruff pat on the shoulder. Your grandfather would be proud. Son, now go run that theater of yours. And that's exactly what we did. With the legal cloud lifted, the Starlight truly began to shine again. We installed the neon sign that had been in storage since the 90s. The concession stand was fully renovated, filling the air with the smell of hot dogs and fresh popcorn. Every Friday night, we showed breakfast at Tiffany's, Nana's favorite film, to a packed house. The community embraced us in ways I never expected. Local businesses sponsored movie nights. The high school held their prom after-party on our grounds. Families celebrated birthdays and anniversaries with private screenings. Teenagers created TikTok dance videos with our vintage neon as a backdrop. As our finances stabilized, I was able to hire a manager, Mrs. Jenkins' granddaughter, who had a business degree and a passion for classic cinema. This allowed me to finally return to college, this time studying business with a focus on entertainment venue management. The following year, an investor from Louisville approached us about replicating our success in Kentucky. With Ellie's design vision and my growing business knowledge, we helped revitalize another abandoned drive-in. A year after that, we expanded to a location in southern Indiana. We found a formula that worked. Preserve the nostalgia while embracing modern technology. Classic films alongside new releases. Traditional concessions with gourmet options. Car speakers for purists and digital audio for everyone else. Soon, Starlight Cinemas became known throughout the Midwest as the people bringing drive-in theaters back from extinction. All of this happened because Pops believed in me when no one else did. Because Ellie believed in us when the odds seemed impossible. Because a community decided that some things are worth saving. 5 years after that fateful day in the lawyer's office, I stood on the freshly mowed lawn of the original Starlight Drive-In, watching as rows of white chairs filled with friends, family, and community members who had become like family. Fairy lights twinkled in the trees, and the massive screen displayed photos of Ellie and me throughout our journey of saving the Starlight. I adjusted my tie nervously as Elvis Presley's Can't Help Falling in Love began playing. The song Pops and Nana had danced at their own wedding 60 years earlier. Ellie appeared at the end of the aisle, radiant in a vintage-inspired dress, walking toward me with that same determined smile that had first appeared in my life when I caught her admiring our faded sign in the middle of the night. As we exchanged vows on the stars, I couldn't help but think about the unlikely path that had brought us here. From inheritance to vandalism to courtroom drama to success beyond anything I could have imagined. I was surprised when Ryan showed up at the reception, looking humbler than I'd ever seen him. Harvard Business School had apparently taught him something after all. I was wrong, he admitted, pulling me into an awkward hug. What you've built here, it's incredible. I was a real jerk. Water under the bridge. I told him, and meant it. Success has a way of washing away old resentments. Dad sent a card but didn't attend. Some bridges take longer to rebuild than others. The card simply read, "Congratulations, you proved me wrong." Coming from Thomas Miller, this was practically a tearful apology. After the ceremony, we unveiled a small bronze plaque near the entrance, "For Pops and Nana, forever under the stars." A permanent testament to the people whose love story had started it all. Of course, no Starlight event would be complete without at least one technical glitch. When it was time for our first dance as a married couple, the screen behind us suddenly switched from our romantic photo montage to the opening sequence of Ghostbusters, the proton packs firing up just as we took our position on the dance floor. I burst out laughing. "See? Even the ghosts love our cinema." Ellie grinned and whispered, "Some things never change." And I wouldn't have it any other way. I often think about something Pops told me during one of our last conversations before he passed. Ruins aren't the end, Jake. They're where new stars begin. At the time, I thought he was just being poetic about the Starlight. Now I understand he was talking about life itself. Looking out at the thriving drive-in, at the woman who became my partner in every sense, at the community that rallied around a forgotten piece of their history, I feel a sense of completion that I never thought possible for the second-best son who once cleaned tables at Marge's Diner. My voice trembles slightly as I make a toast, raising my glass toward the starry sky above us. The Starlight isn't just a place. It's proof that dreams shine forever. And somewhere up there, I like to think Pops and Nana are dancing under those same stars, proud of what their legacy has become. Sometimes inheritance isn't just about what you receive. It's about what you do with it. Sometimes a rundown drive-in theater is actually the beginning of the greatest story of your life.